Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for an Americans for Limited Government live stream. Today, we want to talk to you about the news that's just all over the place. We're all living it every day. Biden's out of control inflation. There's a lot to discuss here, and we want to hear from you how you are being impacted. But before we get to that, we want to give you an update on our campaign that we launched yesterday. And if any of you were with us yesterday watching, you know that we have launched a nationwide campaign to defund Biden's vaccine mandates. We have a website. It's called Defund the Mandates, and I'll put that name up for you. And we'll share with you the latest numbers. Rick, where are we with this campaign? I think we're doing very well, actually.
Well, I have to say I'm blown away. I'm so excited about what's going on. We have 16 million emails that have been delivered to Congress. 16 million emails. Now, any of you who have participated know that you're sending it to all 535 members, but we are hearing from Congress that they are from people about, wait a second, hold on, wait, why am I getting all these emails? Oh no. And so this has just been great. It's the tip of the iceberg. We are just really getting into this. It's gone viral. We have a number of people who are tweeting it out and putting the word out. And I would anticipate that over the weekend, if the people keep pushing this, keep pushing it back out to your list, and just say, if you haven't taken action, do it now. We will get 1 million people actually contacting Congress. And that, I'm just telling you, this is a game changer. What you guys are doing is a game changer. And it's just, I'm so excited because, sometimes you take a risk, you do something and you never know if it's going to work. Well, folks, you're making this one work, and we just truly appreciate it. And so that's the update. You've got the defundthemandates.com. Just spread the word to everybody about it and make certain that we leave the footprint we need to leave, so nobody in Congress has any doubt about where America stands when it comes to funding the vaccine mandate. That's what we have to do. That's what we're trying to do. That's what you're accomplishing through this. And 16 million emails is leaving a mark. 100 million emails is going to basically leave a crater. So let's crater them.
And Rick, we know that the American people want to get back to normal. They want to end the mandates and the restrictions. A recent Monmouth University poll showed that 78% of Americans agree with the statement that it's time to get back to normal. Essentially, that's why we're seeing all these blue state governors following the lead of Republican governors like Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, doing away with these mask mandates. Sometimes even in the schools. I mean, it has to be happening in the schools, but the schools seems to have been a little bit still more contentious there. But we are seeing California is dropping the indoor mask mandates all over the place because these politicians know that Americans are tired of the mandates and the restrictions. And Congress so far has kind of been a little bit silent on this, right? They've left it up to the state and local governments. But they do have a very important role, and that is in funding these federal mandates. So I am so grateful that so many of our friends and followers around the country are sending a message loud and clear to Congress that they want an end to these mandates.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Congress is hearing it. We have an opportunity right now to actually win this fight. Right now, we have an opportunity to win this fight. The people who are on our side up on the Hill are just ecstatic with what's happening. They're getting a little flack because why am I getting bombarded? But you know what? That's why those people are talking to about what do we have to do? What do we have to do to make it stop? So this is really, really good stuff. Catherine, what you don't know about Catherine is we both come from a National Rifle Association background. I was a lobbyist for 9 years. Catherine was in the communications department for 7 years, many years after I left because she's much younger than I am. But but you know what? The single thing always holds true. You can be right all you want, but until they think the public agrees with you, until they feel the heat, as Catherine said yesterday, until they feel the heat, they don't actually want to salute the right policy. And we're bringing the heat, folks, and we just have to double down and bring more heat because
The saying is politicians, when they feel the heat, they see the light.
Yep.
That's it.
And right now, and the light that they were seeing before was kind of this opaque inside the Beltway view that nobody really cares about this. It's just a bunch of radicals. Nobody's going to do, it's the safe inside the Beltway thing was to do nothing. And now we've got them looking outside of the Beltway to their home states, and they're saying, holy moly, this is something I didn't anticipate. And that's why the next 3 days, Saturday, the rest of Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, are critical because we've got 16 million now emails in. And if we crank it up and we're able to continue this momentum and get some really massive players to jump in, but you get all your contact lists, everybody to sign this, we will end up in an environment where they will be calling us up and begging us to turn it off. And when they beg you to turn it off, the answer is very simple. Well, are you going to defund the mandate? No messing around. You have 41? Because if you don't have 41, come back to me when you got 41. Because that's where we win. And
Rick,
for NRA lobbyists, let me trust me when I tell you, I'm not really one to back away from a fight. So this is a great thing you guys are doing.
Rick, in just the 5 minutes that we've been talking, nearly 100,000 new emails have gone into Congress. So I just went in and updated the website, and the little clicker there, you can see it on the screen. It updates in real time. So
Wow.
Just in the 5 minutes we've been talking, about 100,000 additional emails have gone into Congress. So if you haven't already done it, just go to defundthemandates.com. You can do this in less than 60 seconds. This website will allow you to send an email to your senators, your member of Congress, just a very short, very polite, friendly email saying, I don't support Biden's vaccine mandates, and I would like you to defund them in the current spending bill. And it's respectful. The tone is not, sort of in your face aggressive. I think anyone would feel comfortable sending that message to their elected officials. And the more we get in there, like Rick said, the more impact we will have.
And then the next step on that is the 30 seconds to share it, because there's buttons to share it right there on the after you send, and then just hit the button to share it on Facebook or whatever your social media is, because that's how this is an exponential growth game, and that's how we grow this exponentially, and that's how things go viral, and that's so you guys are just doing great. Kat, you want to talk about inflation now, since we're kind of hoping Robert would join us, but he's busy completing an assignment, and so let's just get into inflation now.
Yep, stand by. I'm going to switch out the screens here, folks.
There you go. And you'll note I'm learning a very good lesson. I had never realized that a simply striped kind of shirt bounces. It doesn't really do well on camera until I just saw this, and it gets a little busy, but that's okay. I hope your eyes are not going to be too negatively impacted by the shirt bouncing everywhere. So.
I'm looking at you now with a closer. It's not too
okay.
bad.
Okay, it's okay, good, because you didn't want me to take off my shirt. Trust me.
So this story that Robert Romano, our Vice President of Public Policy, wrote in today's Daily Torch, 7.5% red hot inflation reading after a $6.8 trillion COVID spending. And it has the Biden economy teetering on the edge. Rick, we haven't seen inflation like this since 1982. I mean,
Yeah,
for me, I was a child. I think you probably were a teenager, very young. I mean, this is just nothing many Americans have not experienced this in their lifetime. Let's put it
right.
that way.
And to put 1982 into context, Epcot Center in Florida opened in 1982. Okay? That's just to put it into context. That's what we're talking about. And Catherine, I hate to tell you, but I was graduating from college and married. I got married in 1982. At least that's what I'm told. So it's a so yeah, I was a little older than a child, although my wife was still a child, as she reminds me. So anyway, that yeah, the so this has been happening for a very very long time. It hasn't happened for a very long time. Two generations of Americans have never experienced this kind of inflation, but those of us who have know that it is pernicious. It is devastating. The harder you work, the further you fall behind. And in 2021, Americans their money was worth 2.3% less. Their earnings, they earned 2.3, the equivalent of 2.3% less money in 2021 because of inflation eating away any salary gains that they got during the year. And so, you have your money worth. You can only buy you got your raise, you got everything, but guess what? You can buy 2.3% less than you could a year ago. That's Bidenflation.
Rick, the question from one of our viewers on YouTube, you hear about the government, investors, and corporations pushing ESG nowadays. What is that? Environment, social,
Yeah,
governance?
it's governance. It's a ESG is effectively the left wing invest in social justice programs and in green programs and the last word is governance. And so if you're trying to force companies to engage in environmental policies and social justice policies by virtue of having investors come in and rate them for how friendly they are in that way and determine whether or not big investment houses are going to give them money or not based upon that. To give you an example of what's happened, back during the Obama administration, I was working in the George W. Bush administration. I was working in the Department of Labor. We had a guidance to the investment community, to Wall Street, that said, you can invest in green companies, but they have to be fiduciarily sound the same way that non-green companies would be. So we basically said it was fine to invest in them, but they had to be, you couldn't invest in them based on a social policy. You had to invest in them because it was a good investment. Okay. And the Obama administration ripped that up and said, nope, we don't want to do that. And they did one which essentially told Wall Street, put your green thumb on the scales in favor of environmentally and social justice leading companies. And they created massive mutual funds around this. And they would only invest in companies that they deemed to be ESG compliant as they defined it. And so companies naturally are chasing investors. And so they started trying to get, comply with that so they can get part of the dollars there. Those ESG funds would end up buying up some companies that maybe were somewhere somewhere on the edge. They'd buy some stocks, and then they'd come into the board meetings and would demand that the board have ExxonMobil, for instance, support global warming policies that destroyed the oil industry. And so you ended up with that kind of thing happening. Under Trump, the ESG rule was set back to the way it was under George W. Bush, pretty much the same. But Biden's torn that up. Wall Street is now 80% of corporations are now out of the CEOs say that that corporations are engaged in ESG policies, and they're being driven by something called stakeholders. Stakeholders are not people who actually own any of the company. They're people who want to tell the company what to do because they are affected by the company. And that means anybody on the left can say they're a stakeholder. And that is who a lot of these companies now are listening to, rather than their actual shareholders or what the business interest is for that company. As shocking as it might seem, the Business Roundtable, which is a group in Washington D.C. of the largest companies in America, has changed their policy last year to say, actually it was 2 years ago, to say that they were no longer shareholder driven, but instead stakeholder driven. That's an assault on capitalism by those who are the primary beneficiaries of capitalism. It's suicide. It's stupid. And that's exactly what they're doing. Yes, the Federal Reserve, to get to the Federal Reserve part of the question, the Federal Reserve is now, there's one of the nominees, her name's Raskin, last name's Raskin, who's up for consideration for Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve sets all the banking policy, all the fiscal, financial, monetary policy of the country. Their number one task is to fight inflation. This particular nominee believes that their number one task should be social justice, creating corporate social justice and corporate environmental spending, rather than actually trying to get a profit and doing the things that make a company fiduciarily sound. So yes, the Federal Reserve plays a role. Yes, Ms. Raskin, who is wife of a congressman from Maryland, is a threat to the basic function of the Federal Reserve. And yes, the Senate should reject your nomination.
Rick, Robert Romano wrote a piece about inflation, and I want to just pull out one of the things he said, because this tells you how inflation is truly impacting us as it relates to wages and employment. He says, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, real earnings are down year over year 1.3%. From January of 2021 to January of 2022, real average hourly earnings decreased 1.3%, and that's seasonally adjusted. Now, the change in real average hourly earnings combined with a decrease of 1.5% in the average work week resulted in a 2.7% decrease in real average weekly earnings over this period. So in other words, just 1 year into the Biden administration, Americans are working less on average, paying more for their consumer goods, and thus earning less. Are you better off than you were a year ago? Real earnings say no.
I think most people would say no, given the fact the entire world's in turmoil for a lot of reasons. But the fact is, what Robert Rice is exactly correct. 18 states, just to be fair to Biden, which we don't have to be, but we will. 18 states increased the minimum wage last year in 2021. Increasing the minimum wage automatically, obviously, raises the wages of the bottom of the employees. The problem with that is, as everybody predicts, when that occurs, what happens? Well, guess what? People automate. And we ended up having the average hourly work week of those wage earners going from 35 hours a week to 34.5 hours a week. When you lose that half an hour a week, and you can make more money. If I make $10 an hour, but I'm working a half an hour less, my money went away. I'm not making any more. I'm not coming out with more at the end of my paycheck. I'm actually making less. And that's what happened in 2021. And that's not even counting but when you add in the fact that that the dollar's worth less, that's how you come up with that devastating number of people who are hourly wage earners making significantly less than they did, in spite of the minimum wage going up in a lot of big states. So that's the perverse thing that happens when the government artificially raises minimum wage. Employers behave rationally. They say, okay, I only can pay so much for labor. And as a result, we're going to send people home early. We might not open as early. We might decide that we can get by with only 5 people on shift rather than 7. And those kinds of things make it so the average person ends up working fewer hours, hence nets fewer less at the end of the day, in spite of the fact they have got a raise.
So, Rick, and the problem I think for a lot of Americans is that you go to the grocery store, beef, hot dogs, ham, anything like that is costing you more. Gas is costing us 40% more today than a year ago. And Joe Biden held a news conference yesterday to try to promote legislation that the Democrats introduced last fall that would try to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. And so in the news conference, he addressed the issue of inflation, and he tried to sort of acknowledge that, yes, this is hurting families, but then his solution is, number one, he says we need to pass his Build Back Broke bill, which everyone on Capitol Hill agrees that legislation is dead. I mean, as written, it's not going anywhere. So there he was trying to bring back from, resurrect this bill that everyone agrees is dead. He said, well, if you would just pass this bill, we could get, people some relief. And then so secondly, he was addressing prescription drug costs. And in that sort of news conference, he admitted the truth that it was shocking, like he was honest. Did you realize that the cost of healthcare has gone up? This past decade that we've had Obamacare in place, if I have a number.
It was 50%, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's exactly. Thank you, Rick. It has gone up. The cost of healthcare in this country, the amount of money we're spending has gone up by 50%. The same decade we had healthcare in place. That was Joe Biden, Barack Obama's big claim to, accomplishment. And here we are still dealing with high healthcare costs. And then Rick Romano in our policy division pulled out that how much the median household, right? Whatever the median household income in, it's about $60,000. In 1999, they were paying about 9% of that was for healthcare insurance premiums. Today, or I should say in 2020, it's 33%. So about a third of the median household income is going to pay for healthcare premiums. And that is outrageous.
Let me clarify kind of, because after Robert was talking to you, we went through it a little bit, and let me dial that back a little bit, because that's the total amount that was paid for the healthcare. But if you have employer-sponsored healthcare, the employer will typically pay 80% of that. So the real number is probably 17%. But if you think about it, 17% of your income, say you make $60,000 a year, which means you're clearing about 40. Okay. But $60,000 a year, and you get 17% of that. 17% of 60,000 is about $10,000. Okay. So after you pay taxes, you got 40 left over. If 10,000 is going for healthcare coverage alone, I mean, you essentially are starting out in the hole. You're starting out saying all the rest of your bills, you can only spend $2,000 a month on. Your mortgage, your food, all the stuff you need you do are basically your salary is decimated by the healthcare costs. And yeah, just as most of us said, with Obamacare was never designed to actually cut costs on healthcare. It was designed to give government and never an absolute stranglehold on healthcare. So when we got to this point where healthcare was continuing to rise in costs, that there would be an uprising by the populace to say, we want government paid healthcare. I think you should remember that thinking, because we just saw what government healthcare looks like. The reason we have a vaccine mandate is because the government took over your healthcare. The reason we couldn't get a colonoscopy was because, not that anybody really likes that, but we couldn't get a colonoscopy for a year, was because the government took over the healthcare and said, no, we're going to keep all the beds available for people with COVID. So we've had government run top-down healthcare for the past year and a half, and I don't think anybody wants that. But ultimately, that's the goal, is to get single payer, where the government makes all the decisions in terms of healthcare, makes a decision whether you can get ivermectin or not, makes a decision whether or not monoclonal antibody therapies will be available to you or not, makes a decision on whether or not you can get into a hospital room, whether or not you're eligible to get a transplant. Those are all things that the government want during this particular circumstance, that people have discovered across the country has been the result of government taking over the healthcare system. So, no, we don't want that for sure. But yeah, the Obamacare was a failure in terms of bringing price control, in terms of creating any cost savings. It didn't accomplish that. And quite honestly, the only thing that gets cost savings is if you have competition, and that's really the only way you get there. And our current insurance-driven system and subsidized system is not competitive. So we really need wholesale reform of the healthcare system. But to get back to the inflation point, that's kind of an example of how over time our money can get eaten away by just a continual kind of almost drip, drip, drip of inflation. We didn't look at it, but higher education, for instance, is always running about 9-10% inflation year to year over the last 25 years, whereas the inflation rate's been about 2%. And so that's why your higher education costs keep on going up. And the reason is government subsidizes higher education. So higher education doesn't have to compete on price. And as a result, they don't care if your kid ends up in debt for the rest of their lives. They want, this is about kind of maneuvering the system to make it so the higher education establishment, is able to hire more people and get more power and that's, unfortunately, it's not about educating your kids. That's just a unfortunate reality of where we're at. Inflation and government subsidies government subsidies like that actually drive inflation directly in terms of higher education.
Rick, I think we all remember just a few months ago when inflation really started to move up, the Biden administration and President Biden himself were making statements like, oh, this is transitory. This is just all COVID related, supply chain issues. Don't worry, folks. Everything's going to smooth out here. Well, I'll read from a New York Times article I have on the screen. This is from yesterday. Markets tumbled after the government released the consumer price index data for January, which showed prices jumping 7.5% over the year and 0.6% over the past month. That was exceeding the forecast. Now, more worrying were the report's details, which showed inflation moving beyond pandemic-affected goods and services, a sign that rapid gains could prove longer lasting and harder to shake off. So I think that's becoming the reality that is setting in, that people around the country recognize this isn't going away quickly. This is something we're going to have to deal with. And the Biden administration, Rick, I don't see them dealing well with it. Like I said earlier, Joe Biden seems to think if he can just get another multi-trillion-dollar spending bill, that's going to solve the problem, when we know that, in fact, his massive spending is what has led us to this inflation.
Yeah, and more importantly, Joe Manchin knows it. So Manchin's been very clear about inflation, how he's going to fight it. He's stated that again and again. Interestingly, other Democrats are now coming out. Mark Kelly is finally, is saying concern about inflation, voted for Build Back Better, and yet now he's making statements about being concerned about inflation, not thinking the president's done a very good job on it. Well, he is up for election a year, and he's in trouble in that election in Arizona. So, and he didn't, unlike his counterpart, Kirsten Sinema, who, by the way, is no conservative. She's very, very liberal, but he never stood up to Biden on anything. And so now he's trying to maneuver so people think he's actually one of the good guys, when in fact, it just shows how desperately weak the Democrats are, that now Mark Kelly's saying, oh my gosh, prices are rising. It must be Biden's fault. Well, he's right. It's Biden's fault, but it's also his fault. He voted for this stuff. So it's and when he voted for Build Back Better, he was voting for more of it. So that's your, so Manchin was right. Manchin is standing up, and he's saved the country even more extensive inflation. But to get to the real challenge that they're talking about, and this Biden didn't actually deal with this, but he's going to have to. The challenge is once people get the expectation that prices are going to go up 6, 7, 8%, they start demanding raises of 7, 8, 9%. And when people start getting raises of 7, 8, 9%, those employers then have to raise prices even more than are being raised based on inflation because they can't subsidize the thing. And you end up with this vicious cycle of wage inflation where you have wages go up, prices go up to pay for it. Then wages go up and prices go up to pay for it. And it's the cycle we end up in the 70s. And it's very hard to get out of because ultimately somebody ends up being the loser, and the loser almost always is the person who's trying to just pay their bills. We had President Nixon way back in the 70s do wage and price controls to try to get out of this cycle. It made it much, much worse. Not one of the great moments of his time. Those of us who remember Gerald Ford and his WIN campaign, where he wanted us all walk around with buttons and say "Whip inflation now." Inflation was so pernicious that the President of the United States went on TV and asked everybody to wear a button that said "Whip inflation now." Kind of the hashtag it out of existence approach, but nonetheless, it was what he did. Did not win election and ended up being replaced by Jimmy Carter, who didn't deal with it. So Ronald Reagan came in and he did. But the way you deal with it is you kill the economy. And that's what Ronald Reagan did. He killed the economy along with the Fed chair, Paul Volcker.
And Rick, I think that's exactly what the Federal Reserve is saying. They're going to raise interest rates to try to put pressure to bring the inflation down, right? And so they try to force recessionary policies and behaviors.
100% correct. And so when Joe Biden said that his experts tell him, the same experts that said that inflation was transitory are now saying, well, probably go away by about the end of the year and start tapering by the end of the year. What those experts are really saying is, we believe that we're going to be our economy is going to be slowing dramatically. We're going to end up in a recession, and it will have the effect of killing inflation sometime around the end of the year. So that's because traditionally, that's how inflation at this level ends up being brought under control. And that is by slowing the economy down, and which throws people out of work. So people can't afford to buy stuff. And so then there's lower demand, and you end up with price stability because you've cut demand because you've made everybody poor. That's how you deal with it.
And just to close it out, I would say the demand is so high because Joe Biden flooded the economy and families' pocketbooks with all these stimulus checks, which at the time, and I have a 24-year-old daughter who was loving every check she got. I'm not quite sure how many, she got 3 or 4, but every time she got a check, she was so excited to run out and spend it. And I kept telling her, I'm like, Emily, this is not good policy. Believe me, in a very short time, we're going to regret this. But, so many Americans didn't see that. I mean, I knew stories, Rick, of families, like with 5 children who were getting all these child credit monies, like $10,000, and they were putting new decks on their home. And I mean, this is real money, and people were really happy about it. But, Rick, you were saying all along, this is not going to end well.
No, it never does. Helicopter money never ends well because eventually the piper has to be paid. And right now, you're paying for that very thing because, hold on a second. Right now, we're paying for those stimmy checks by virtue of higher prices, and so everybody who enjoyed them then, you're paying back the money, but you're not paying it back directly. You're paying it back by having less, your dollars being worth less. And trust me when I say that is a far worse tax because it affects everybody. If you want to talk about a regressive tax, the Biden inflation tax is the most regressive tax in the world because it affects people at all income levels, but the people who can at least afford to have less and their dollars being worth less are those who have to scrape by to get by every single day. The people at the bottom of the income scale, the ones who dramatically are hurt way more. And that's what inflation does. That's the net effect of Biden's inflation. And anytime these guys come to you and they say, gee, I'm going to help you out. If the government says to you, I'm the government, I'm here to help, run. Don't walk, run away from those people, because the government may help you now, but with their other hand, they're going to be taking the money right out of your pocket, whether it's through taxes or inflation.
And Rick, before we leave, because I know you have another commitment here, I'm going to update our ticker on our defund the mandates website. Oh my goodness, Rick. Okay, so when we started the show today, let me pull this up. We had 16,139,000 actions, emails sent into Congress. We've been going live for 36 minutes, Rick. We are now up to 16,451,000. What is that? A 300,000 increase.
Yep, that's and those members of Congress right now, they're sitting there and they're just saying, when is this going to stop? And folks, let's do our job, make sure it doesn't.
That's so in 30 minutes, 300,000. What is that? 10,000 a minute?
300,000. That means every hour is 600,000. If we kept that up 24 hours, you've got at that point you got another 17 million in 24 hours. So let's just keep rolling them in there, and you guys have the power in your keyboards. So let's go with the defundthemandates.com. And I've got another media interview to talk about defundthemandates.com. So I appreciate everything you guys are doing. You're doing great. Hope the inflation talk was helpful. Check out Robert's article on dailytorch.com. And we do a lot of stuff on economics and the like. And it's kind of one of our passions that we do right here. So just check out what we've got. And hopefully, if you have any ideas on things that we should be talking about related to any of the economic problems, let us know and we'll try to figure it out for you.
Hey, and thank you for the nice words. We'll end with that. We appreciate you all joining us today, and we will see you next time on another Americans for Limited Government live stream.